Slides are really a beautiful thing for presentations. They help us organize our thoughts, decide what findings to show, and of course, they help us communicate more effectively with our audience. Making good slides is not hard, but it's not that simple either. I think all of us have probably seen a slide like this where somebody whacked an entire paragraph onto the slide. Or something like this, which is even worse, a graph with so much information that it's impossible to tell what the point is. So we need to think about our audience more carefully. Let's take into account two things. How people learn, and that's through multiple exposure. They have to see things 2, 3, sometimes 4 times before they really understand or remember what's being communicated. And then people remember small pieces of a story and then assemble those pieces into the full story. The second thing we should take into account is how we actually see slides. Slides are a visual medium. So a slide should focus the eye to the key information, and it's got to be gentle on the eye so that you can take your time to roam around and find out what is being presented in the slide. Let's see how we can do that. First lesson, simplify as much as possible. Remove every bit of information that's not essential. So here's a slide I made a while back when teaching research methods. It's basically the story of causality, what it is that we mean when we say something is causal. The first thing you realize is your eye has nowhere to go. You don't know where to look. There's just so much going on. Once you get to the actual content, which is here in the middle, the text is visually very difficult to go through. There's just too much in all one. Basically, it's a paragraph that's being cut and paste. So what can we do to simplify this in just a few basic moves? Well, first of all, there's a running footer here, which is completely unnecessary. So we can get rid of that. So that helps. Secondly, what really stands out in the slide is the reference. That's the least important piece of information on the slide. So let's move that to the bottom where it's less visible. And then let's make it smaller. And then we'll move it to the right. Create a little bit of space. And there we go. So now your eye goes fairly quickly to the main body of text, which is where you want it to go. The background is still quite distracting and stressful, so I would definitely remove that. So if we format the shape here, we can just have no background. The same here, I don't see any real advantage in having the slide title be that prominent. So I would get rid of the fill, and I would make this easier to read. Comic Sans is a very difficult font. Maybe use Tahoma, which is just a little bit more square and easier. And then I would reduce the size so it's not as prominent, and maybe give it a different color so it stands out but it doesn't dominate. So visually the slide is now much less stressful, and it's easy to identify where the gold is, which is the text right here. The text itself, however, is actually hard to approach because there's just so many words all clustered together. So we can break this up into a couple of key parts. One is the first clause, which is simply to say that a factor X is a cause of outcome Y. Space is to say that a change in X generates a change in Y. Blah, 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 blah. Given certain background conditions. So what we can do here is if we make this a little bit smaller, then we have more space to work with. And then we can sort of isolate. This is really the key part. A change in X generates a change in Y relative to what Y would have been otherwise if there had been no X around. So that's really what a cause is. Things a little bit tighter. And let's get a reference back in here. Just at the bottom there. Let's have a look. So we started with a fairly stressful slide with lots of text. Then we moved to, on the right, a much simpler slide where your eye immediately knows where to go and where to find the key information. And the text is broken up into 3 basic pieces. which helps build the story up of what we mean by causality. Now, it could still be a lot simpler to understand. And we can do that by changing some of the language. So instead of causality, a definition, we can say simply, what is a cause? That's the story. It's a story of what is a cause. And then do some formatting on the first sentence by presenting it this way here. And then this big piece of text here, which is really the heart of the definition, the part of the story you really want to communicate, can be broken up. And then this last bit, which is really sort of secondary interest, gets put into an entirely separate slide. So we can take the next step and add in a diagram that provides people multiple exposure. There's a text on the left-hand side that explains what a cause is. And then there's a diagram which in an intuitive way communicates the same thing. So you get a second exposure. And some people learn easier with a visual image than they do with text. So that's very helpful to them. So here you have a little boy who's the cause, X, of the broken window, which is the outcome, Y. And then the mechanism through which he broke the window is this baseball here at the bottom, which is Z. The rest of that original slide can come separate. And then again, breaking the last sort of clause of that story into two pieces, which are easier to assimilate. And then there's a little diagram here with the background conditions. It's a sunny day, we're close to the ocean with certain atmospheric pressure. If those things hold, then the boy throwing the ball is going to break the window. So let's see, from the original on the left-hand side to the final, broken into two slides, lots of spacing, multiple exposure through these additional images. It's more likely people will remember what you said the next day after the presentation. If the first lesson is we need to simplify your slides, the second is to take seriously that slides are a visual medium, and we need to focus our audience's attention to the field that it creates. And that means first, guide where people are going to look, and secondly, hold their attention. The slide here at the bottom is really nice because it clearly guides where people should look. Your eyes go from the researcher on the top left corner, down along the arrows to the empirical phenomena at the bottom right-hand corner. And then in the middle, you see the different screens through which the arrows pass. So this both guides the eye nicely, and it also holds your attention. So let's take another example here. Again, the slide is very busy, it's very complex, it's hard to know where to look. But more importantly, there's a long list of types of causality. Lists in general are a terrible idea. People have a really hard time remembering them. So spare the audience. Let's think carefully about what we can do with this. So here I've highlighted equifinality, and let's see what we can do with that. So the first step is to remove the story of equifinality into a separate slide. And here we have something that's visually very, very simple. There's a title with a lot of space around it. There's a very short, simple definition. Equifinality is multiple causes or causal paths can lead to the same outcome. And then there's a second exposure underneath it, which is this famous quote, all roads lead to Rome. And in fact, all roads lead to London, Nairobi, or any capital city. And this second exposure helps consolidate the idea of what we mean by multiple causes or causal paths. Now, we can do better than that. Visually, to make this interesting, to hold our attention, we can add an image here on the right-hand side. So what we now have is a highly visible title. We look down to where the definition of equifinality is. Then we have the second exposure in the example at the bottom. And then the image is effectively a third exposure. And visually, it's quite captivating. It's relatively simple. It's a series of lines all going to the same point. But it suggests that all these people at the final destination, the final point in London, have gotten there through very different pathways. So there you have something that's visually interesting, but it's also intuitive and easy to digest. And it makes the person roam around the slide to sort of slowly digest what it is that's being said and to try and burn that into their memory. So here we have the original slide on the left with the long list of types of causality. And on the right-hand side, we have the final version. There's many things to consider when making slides, but even these few basic ideas, I think, can go a long way for us to make more simple and effective slides. So with that, good luck to us all.